For those of you who flew on the Delta Shuttle prior to September 11th, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
For those of you who have flown on the shuttle since September 11th, you'll have a pretty good sense of what I'm talking about. And for those of you who have never flown on Delta Shuttle to New York, let me explain. There was, in fact, a golden age of flying, back when you could actually get on a plane and be an empty middle seat between you and your neighbor, back before you had to take your shoes off in order to get on the plane. For a while after the shoe bomber, as we were standing in line barefoot, I would always turn to the person behind me and say, "Thank God he didn't put the bomb in his underwear." And then, of course, there was the underwear bomber, who ruined that perfectly good joke. So back then in this golden age, I could literally wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, jump in the shower, get dressed, jump in my car. I lived in Concord, drive to Logan, make a beeline from the garage straight to the gate. There was no security. And back then, when you got to the gate area, there was a machine that looked like an ATM. And you would buy your ticket right there on the spot with open seating. Then you would just walk to the gate, grab a newspaper, wait in the makeshift line, board the plane, grab a seat, and 45 minutes later, you were landing in LaGuardia. Take a run down, grab a cab, and I could be at my desk in Midtown Manhattan, 8 o'clock in the morning. So pillow to desk in 3 hours flat. Every once in a while, something interesting happened. One time I got on the plane and Spike Lee was sitting in the first row by the window. For those of you who know me, you know where I sat, right in the aisle next to him, chatted him up all the way to Boston. That was fun. Another time, it was January of 1985, I was flying back in the afternoon, and I was seated by the window, and a woman around my age sat down in the aisle seat. So of course we started chatting, and she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm the chief operating officer of a heavy equipment manufacturer in Boston." She said, "Well, that sounds pretty good." I said, "It's all right." I said, "What do you do?" She said, "I manage a rock and roll band." I was like, "A rock and roll band?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Have I ever heard of this rock and roll band?" And she said, "Well, I imagine you probably have." I said, "Well, who is it?" She said, "Bruce Springsteen." So she could have said Bruce. She could have said the boss. My heart was sort of like, but I was cool. I was cool, because Bruce would have wanted it that way, you know? So of course we talked all the way back, and as the plane was touching down at Logan, I turned to her and I said, "Look, the concert's in a few days. I've been a really good boy." Tickets. I'd really like some tickets. And she said, "No problem. There'll be 2 tickets waiting for you at the will call window." And they were there. There were 2 tickets at the will call window, and the concert was just beyond amazing. And my ears rang for 3 days. So that's Exhibit A. Exhibit B is, it was just another day in the golden age. And I was working for IBM, and a colleague, Jim, and I had a meeting with AXA Insurance at 10 a.m. in Manhattan. AXA is a very large French insurance and financial services company. So because the meeting was at 10, I got to sleep in. I didn't take the 6:30 shuttle. I took the 7:30 shuttle instead. Now, if you've flown the shuttle before and often enough, you begin to learn some of the idiosyncrasies. And one of them is that there are 2 primary flight paths that the plane takes. The first one is exactly what you would imagine. The plane takes off out of Logan, flies right down the New England coast, and then just glides straight into LaGuardia, straight shot. Exactly what you'd imagine. That happens probably 75% of the time. Around 25% of the time, the plane goes right down the coast, and somewhere down around southern Connecticut, Westchester County, the pilot banks to the right. You're now flying over Westchester County, over the upper reaches of Manhattan. You're in your final descent. Plane banks to the left, and you're coming straight down the Hudson River. And it's low and slow. It's as if you're suspended in air. And you see the Upper West Side, you see the Empire State Building, Lower Manhattan, and then the plane loops around on its edge, right around the Statue of Liberty. You feel like you can just put your hand out and touch the torch. You're that close. And it glides right into Manhattan, into LaGuardia. So it was a beautiful morning, and in fact, we were flying, and now comes the secret. The secret is that when you fly on the shuttle, if that's going to happen, you want to be in the second row on the left by the window. Best seat in the house. So I got on the plane that morning, and luck was with me. Grabbed my seat, and we're heading down the coast, and we get to southern Connecticut, and sure enough, the plane banks to the right, and it's like, we're in luck. Here we go. So we cut across Manhattan, we come down the Hudson, it's beautiful. We loop around the Statue of Liberty, we land in LaGuardia. If you know that what happens, because on the shuttle, it's just a bunch of people who have flown a million times, when the plane lands and stops and the bell goes off, it's just like, all rise. You know, everybody gets up, and that plane empties. It feels like it empties in about 2 minutes. So, and then everybody just sort of briskly walks through the terminal and to the taxi stand. And so I went down, grabbed a taxi, opened up the newspaper, and we're off. And several minutes into the flight, into the drive, there's a little rap on the partition. And the driver goes, look. Oh. And off in the distance were the World Trade Towers with a plume of charcoal-colored smoke pouring outside into the horizon. At that point, nobody knew what was happening. He turned on the radio. They said a small plane had crashed into the building. Of course, the story started to develop as we went into Manhattan. He dropped me off at the IBM building. And I met my colleague Jim there. And of course, everybody was just in a state of shock. But New York being surreal, we actually got on the phone and called AXA Insurance to see if the meeting was postponed. Well, of course it was postponed. So we made our way downstairs. There was a large flat screen TV on the wall, and everybody was just huddled around the TV, and we watched the towers fall, and we just watched the news for a while, and then somewhere around 11 or 11:30, we sort of looked at each other and said, I don't know, being in an IBM building in the middle of Manhattan on a day like that may not be the brightest idea. So we grabbed our briefcases, and we went downstairs, and we went outside, and we walked down the street, and we walked into a hotel bar. We ordered a drink. TV was going off in the corner. We had a drink, stepped outside onto the sidewalk, gave each other a hug, and Jim said to me, where are you going? And I said, well, my cousin lives on the Upper West Side, 96 and Riverside. I'm going to walk up there and figure it out. I said, what about you? He said, I'm walking downtown. I want to help. I'm sure they need help. There are only a few times in a person's life when you're faced with a really big decision in real time with no time to think about it. And there I was. And I didn't even take that moment to think I knew I was not going downtown with them. I had flown down in a plane from Boston minutes before the hijackers. Perhaps the last plane to fly down the Hudson, certainly one of the last people to see the towers from the air, and I was scared. So we hugged again, and I walked uptown, he walked downtown. The Marines have an expression, run towards the sound of chaos. And here I was walking in the opposite direction. I thought that I would beat myself up perhaps for the rest of my life over this decision. It felt cowardly, it felt selfish. But that's not what happened. Something better happened. I decided it just wasn't my time. It just wasn't my time. And I was in good company that day. And if that had been the end of it, then I think it would have felt cowardly. But what I did was I made a pledge to myself, and I said, my time will come, and I'll make good on this. And fast forward 8 years, 2008, February of 2008, if you remember, it was the absolute depth of the recession. Companies were laying off literally 750,000 people a month. I was still working for IBM, and I retired from IBM. Why, you ask? Would somebody who loves their job, loves their company, let somebody choose to retire from at the worst possible moment? And the answer is that IBM helped me with the decision. They laid off 15,000 people over the course of 2 weeks, and I was one of them. But they didn't exactly lay me off. They did allow me, they did offer to let me keep my job if I was willing to move on my own to India to work for the local wage and get paid in rupees. So I thought that over. No, I didn't think that over. But it was a little levity. So anyway, I settled in and I ran the numbers and I realized I don't have to work anymore, I can retire. And that's when I realized that my time had come. So for the past 10 years, I've done pro bono consulting to the leadership of around 40 different nonprofits, primarily in Lowell, also Worcester, Boston, surrounding communities. I've mentored hundreds of inner city high school students in Boston and Lowell, and I cook for community dinner for people who really need a meal. It's been the most gratifying work of my life. Back in 2012, I was fortunate enough to be able to work on a strategic plan with a minister and congregation of a Unitarian church right here in Rock. It turns out that the minister and I somehow fell in love, and we got married last year. Many of you were there. So believe me, you have to believe me. It was never part of the plan. American Airlines Flight 11 took off minutes after my plane took off. Had the hijackers not been so thorough in their planning, had they not insisted on taking a plane destined for Los Angeles because that plane was full of jet fuel and that would maximize the inferno, they most likely would have chosen my plane, the one that was already heading straight for the towers. And there I would have been, row 2 by the window, hoping for a great view of Manhattan, probably within arm's reach of one of the hijackers. I'd like to think I would have done what I could if it had been my flight, but it wasn't my flight. And the rest is just conjecture. So I know what you're all thinking. What about Jim? Jim walked downtown. It turns out that there wasn't much for civilians to do, but that was never the point. Jim and I have remained friends. We stay in touch every September 11th. I told him I was telling the story tonight, and he said to say hello to you all. As for me, I made my way home over the next couple of days, and the boarding pass, I took the boarding pass and I bought a little frame, and it's been sitting on my desk for 18 years. And it's a good reminder. Back to those Marines. Turns out Jim was a former Marine. Who knew? He was used to running towards the chaos. Me, not so much. At least not that day. If you're one of those folks who can run towards the chaos, then go with Godspeed. If, like me, it's just not your moment, I'm here to assure you that when your moment comes, you can stop, turn around, and walk slowly back towards the chaos. It'll be there waiting for you.